Okay, get it on. Hi everybody, and welcome to the World of Witches Museum's Bardic Circle, Friday nights, open mic night. We're going to hear a couple of stories tonight, different events. Hopefully we'll have a few more people coming in as the night wears on. And we hope to entertain you and to perhaps take you back to a simpler time where people sat around and listened to stories and song.
Hello.
Do you want to start off the night?
Well, it was suggested that I might bring my recent artwork that I've recently done and discussed it, so we did.
You might want to bring it closer to the camera now.
I can hold it up if you'd like. How's that?
That's fantastic, and you're not even eclipsing Dawn.
Ooh, wonderful.
Continue, Reverend Lewis.
Well, and this is a drawing that depicts a group ritual working at the moment when the priestess is casting the circle. It's in a kind of a half fantasy style and a half contemporary style. The athame has the energy depicted in the form of a rainbow representing the 7 planes of existence. And the various different items of costuming also have various different bits of symbolism in them. But it's primarily meant to evoke that feeling of the beginning of a ritual. And as you can see through the archway, you can see the full moon, you can see the stars. And it's kind of in the style that I used to do for the many different pagan magazines I used to illustrate for. And it's interesting because at the moment I'm looking at the back of it, and because of the media that is used, you can see almost a different picture from behind because it has a different feeling. And it's interesting to juxtapose the two. And the way that I do this particular style of artwork is in pen and ink. I use basically felt tip markers. And this particular one has a black outline that was done with regular pen and ink, and then the color added with barrel Prismacolor markers, which are really my favorite for this kind of work. And people used to be quite amazed by the amount of delicacy you can get out of a felt tip marker. You can really do quite a bit with them. I like them because the colors are so clear. Although some of the colors in this piece of artwork and other artwork that I do actually represent many different layers of different colors to get exactly the right effect. The other thing that I like about them is that you can be really precise with them. And my particular artistic style is very detail-oriented, very precise. My cousin Crystal loved watercolor, whereas I really never had any luck with watercolor whatsoever. And of course, the difference between the two styles of artwork, the watercolor is very imprecise, very atmospheric, very emotional in character, and the pen and ink is very precise and very, I guess we'd say, very mental in character. And so there you go.
Now I wonder, you mentioned a lot of the older publications that you used to illustrate, some of which we have on exhibit in the museum.
We have a number of them here.
And a lot of our viewers, probably from a younger generation, aren't quite familiar with the time of...
Yeah, they probably wouldn't know what a magazine is. Back in the day, there were... everybody knows about the kind of magazines you'd see in a store, but there were, I think there still are, many of what were called underground publications. And in the pagan world, that was the majority of the journals that were around in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And they tended to come out in one of two different formats depending on the size. They were either photocopied or they came out in like a newspaper format. The bigger ones like Circle Network News and others such as Stardust Salamander, for example, or Survival, tended to use the newsprint format, and many of the smaller ones were photocopied. And what people would do is they would type them up on their typewriters, because this was the era of the typewriter, and they would tape them together with tape. If they were really professional, they might get two-sided tape, which was not as readily accessible at that time, but certainly could be gotten. And the drawings were usually done by hand and photocopied. And some of the prominent magazines back in those days, Circle Network News, which is now called Circle Magazine, was probably the most prominent. It is the only one from that era that I know of that is still in publication in a physical form. A few of them can be found online. There was Harvest, which was published out of New England, which was a prominent newsletter, of which we have many examples. There was the Grave Robbers Gazette, which came out of Indiana and had all kinds of weird little odd things in it. It was called the Grave Robbers Gazette because the editor, Merlin the Enchanter, compared himself to a grave robber in going through all his old periodicals and books and things to look for interesting things to put in this magazine. There was the Unicorn from the Rowan Tree Church, which usually came out in an envelope, and it would be folded over like a letter, and it would have a few pages. There are many others. There was Stardust Salamander, or I'm sorry, the Silver Salamander, no, it was Stardust Salamander, gave the Silver Salamander Award. And for several years, the Silver Salamander Award was given to recognize excellence in pagan journalism. Later, there was the WPPA newsletter, which was the Wiccan Pagan Press Alliance. There was the Crone Papers, which was particularly oriented toward a Crone readership. And we have a fairly good collection of those. There was Seasonal Silver by Donna Lyon-Rose, who was one of the leading poets of the day. And many, many others. And some of these are totally forgotten today. Some of them, like Circle, still actually exist. Some of them are gone but not forgotten. Another one that we have some copies of is the Golden Isis Journal, which focused on poetry. And it was put out by Jarena Dunwich, who also wrote a series of books. And what's interesting about these old magazines is that there's a huge amount of material in them that never came out in published books, but which is still fascinating, and which has a lot to do with the development of the community. And if no one preserves the magazines, they actually will lose a good chunk of the history of the community that is not reflected in the books.
Are there any particular stories that come to mind, or articles that come to mind when you think of that?
Well, actually, one of the things that I think is of particular interest, many of these different magazines had letter sections that featured things that were sent in by their readers. Many of them also had obituary sections that carried news of people's crossings, which often included stories of their lives. In terms of other things, I think that some of them had just magnificently beautiful artwork. Some of them had many of them had recipes and spell work and things like that. And the quality ranged from very amateur to very professional. Some of them were very focused on particular areas. I mentioned Stardust Salamander, which was particularly focused on the Southeast. I did for many years the Roundtable magazine in Chicago, which was particularly focused on the Chicago community. And if you wanted to know the history of the Chicago community in the 90s, you could read that magazine. Most of it is there, including things that people will not remember otherwise, because I don't know that they were written down anywhere else. Unless you go and actually talk to people who are still alive from that era. But in Chicago, a number of the prominent leaders of that era are no longer living. Donna Kohlschultz, Victoria Carlson, people like Sandra Kukla are all in spirit now. And so you couldn't go and interview them. And I would assume that's true for many of the people who are involved in the pagan press, that they either are inaccessible or many of them have crossed over. And so I think the preservation of those magazines is very important for that reason. The other thing about it, our community is very schizophrenic. And if you belong to only one branch of the community, you often don't see anything else. And they can be very myopic in the sense that they only see certain things. The community that was the pagan press represents a distinct branch of the pagan community, which certainly is still an important and prominent branch. But its history, again, is not really recorded elsewhere. One of the things that's always amazed me is how, no matter how active you are, it seems like there's always one more branch to discover. And the only thing that amazes me more than that is how many people don't realize that. And they think that the small corner that they're seeing is all there is. I was very fortunate to be taught from the first that there was a wide world out there, and many different branches and traditions and ways of doing things. And then even more fortunate to actually make the connections that allowed me to see this firsthand and learn from many different points of view. And that's, of course, the other thing that was valuable about these magazines, is that they did not, for the most part, represent the orthodoxy of the organization putting them out, because usually it wasn't an organization, it was a person. And it tended to represent the eclectic viewpoints of the wider community.
Now, did you ever have, I don't know how much of a physical newsroom there was when putting out these magazines?
Usually not. Usually they were done in somebody's house. And the people who contributed, in many cases, never met each other physically. They corresponded by mail, which you may or may not realize there is such a thing that involves envelopes and stamps, and did not have an electronic component in those days. And the contributors would mail in their articles, their artwork, etc. And the publishers would mail out the complimentary issues that usually paid for that, because that's usually what happened. The person would contribute an article, they would get an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes local metaphysical stores would carry the magazines. Often you would see them at pagan gatherings or science fiction gatherings, because those two communities have always tended to overlap. Otherwise, the only place to find out about them was in the cross-advertising they did with each other, which is the other interesting thing about looking at the collections of old magazines, that if you go to the advertising pages, you will see lists of other magazines, which of course also no longer exist today in most cases. And some of them are magazines that endured for many years, such as, for example, the ICN News, which now is entirely online, but still exists, which is the newsletter of the Fellowship of Isis. Their newsletter came out of Ireland, where their headquarters is, and it was also trifolded in the little envelope. It was a brown envelope, and entirely typed up by hand, and it's very interesting to look at them, because everything has very much a Mickey and Judy do the show feel, because that's what it was. And to me, that was always a very good thing, because what it said was, everyone can take part in this. The level is not so high that only certain people can do it. And literally, during the 80s, now in the early 70s it was a little harder. By the late 70s and the 80s, anyone who could get access to a photocopier could put out their magazine and could express their views. Now today, of course, they do it online. And you still see, if you do lots of looking, you still see a lot of the same diversity. And you also still see that schizophrenic quality of the community. And you will see that it's like one group either doesn't, well, it's like they don't recognize each other, but often they don't even know about each other. And it amazed me, during the years we were doing the roundtable, the Chicago community was extremely active. I would say it was one of the most active communities in the country in terms of public events. And in the roundtable, we carried a listing of public temples that at one time included 30 different temples. And yet I would hear from people who could not find other pagans. They could not connect. And where were they? They were in Chicago. It's very interesting how isolated we can sometimes be from one another. And for me, one of the great goals of the last many years has been to break through that isolation. And I will say, I think in many ways we have a less isolated community today, but not in all ways. And you still see that disconnect from one branch to another that has been there throughout my lifetime. And I guess that in one way it is to be expected, because if there was not a separation, they would not be branches.
That's true.
But it can be rather breathtaking sometimes.
I was wondering if maybe you could share a story from this particular time that you've been talking about, Chicago in the 80s and 90s, just to give people a sense of the community, what was going on then, maybe a fond memory.
Well, in Chicago, we started the Roundtable magazine after the Pagan Leadership Conferences, which were initially sponsored by the Pagan Interfaith Embassy. Later, the Pagan Leadership Conference kind of went off and became its own organization. But initially they were sponsored by the embassy, which in turn was inspired by the Parliament of World's Religions. And one of the things that I do remember very strongly is that first Pagan Leadership Conference in Chicago. And the fact that many of the people, well, in fact, almost the entire community, believed it could not be done. They believed it was impossible to get all of the leadership together in one room without having a horrible knockdown, drag-out fight. And many of them would later say that they came to it only to see the train wreck. And the thing that was remarkable about it is there was no train wreck. And a lot of that, well, that was entirely due to Edward, because what he did in organizing that event is he provided a forum for everyone to speak about what they were doing. And a lot of them came thinking that there was some other agenda, but he introduced the event, introduced the first speaker, and from then on it just flowed for the different groups having a forum to present what they were doing. And it really was a wonderful moment of renaissance in that community. It allowed people to come together in a social context where they didn't necessarily have to fight about their differing dogmas and their differing theologies and practices, or their differing histories or different past arguments. And it really allowed the different groups to shine. And to me, that is one of the more inspiring moments that I remember. So there you go.
Well, thank you.
You're very welcome.
All right. Well, we're going to move on perhaps to the next segment of our show. Fox, did you have a story you were planning on sharing tonight? Nope, Fox did not have a storytelling tonight. She was planning on sharing tonight, which means that I can no longer procrastinate telling my story. So the story I picked to tell this week is an old Eskimo tale of the Skeleton Woman. And this story came to mind for several reasons. One, it's Friday the 13th, so we might as well have something a little spooky in there. Secondly, it sort of was a story that I'd been planning on telling actually during my Joseph Campbell group, but I didn't get to. So I kind of doubled up and used my homework for another class. So the Skeleton Woman was not always a skeleton. Once upon a time, she was a beautiful young woman. And her father, for some reason, became very displeased with her. she refused to marry the man of his choice. And in his rage, her father took her and he tied her down with stones and threw her into a great bay where she remained until she, for many, many centuries, until she was completely forgotten. Now this bay was often used by fishermen, though many avoided it because of superstition. Others thought the fishing was good, perhaps because it was so often avoided. And they would take their boats out there. And one such man took his boat out and cast his net. Now deep below, the skeleton woman, who had been resting upon the bottom, saw the net. And she clutched it, hoping for a way up to the surface. She became tangled in it, became twisted in the net as she was pulled up. Above on the surface, the fisherman thought, wow, I must have caught something amazing. It's taking me all day to pull this up. And he struggled, and finally, he had the net towards the surface, and he grabbed his harpoon, ready to strike the skeleton woman. But he saw her, realizing she was no fish, saw her pearly white bones, the empty sockets of her eyes, and panicked. He began to row his canoe faster and faster, realizing that the net was still caught aboard the boat, that the skeleton woman was being dragged behind. He looked behind him, saw what seemed like her chasing him, pulled her so fast that in a crumpled heap she seemed to stand upright but hunched over, arms reached out to grab him. He paddled faster and faster towards the shore, grabbed his supplies and ran, not realizing that he still held the net. The skeleton woman ran, was dragged behind him, tumbling and tangling. The stones of the ground hurt. For even though she was made of bones, she could still feel. He dragged her into his camp and past drying fishes, crashing into a stand of jerked meats and things that were smoking and drying. The skeleton woman grabbed a handful of the drying meat and put it in her mouth, the first food she had tasted in centuries. Finally, the fisherman crawled into his igloo and curled up inside, thinking that he was safe. But he turned and saw the net with the skeleton woman tangled in it. He stared at her for a moment, and in the light of his fire, she seemed to take on a different appearance, softer. Her hair tangled in her face, and she huddled together, still tangled in the net, afraid to speak, afraid that more dragging or injuries would come to her if she did. And the fisherman took pity on her. Gently, he began to untangle the net, and when she flinched, he began to sing soft songs of his childhood to her. Then, he took his furs and wrapped the skeleton woman in them because she seemed cold, and then he went to sleep. And the skeleton woman watched him sleep. And as he slept, he seemed lonely, and he shivered in his sleep. And she did not know what he dreamed, but it seemed to be something sad and lonely, because 2 tears fell from his eye. And the skeleton woman looked at those tears and realized how thirsty she was, so far away from the sea. And she came, and she knelt down beside him, and she scooped up the 2 tears with one finger, and she drank them. Then, the skeleton woman lay beside him and heard his heart beating. And perhaps it was an old magic learned from her time beneath the sea, or some ancient wisdom that came to her. But the skeleton woman knew, or a way came to her. She opened up the man's chest very gently and removed the beating drum that she heard within him. And she began to play that drum, to drum upon his heart. And as she drummed, slowly but surely, muscles began to creep upon her empty bones, and then flesh. In eyes that had been hollow and empty, slowly white orbs grew, and a deep brown spheres within them. Her hair, thin and mangled from the sea, became thick and rich and black. and suddenly she was a whole woman again. Just as tenderly as she removed it, the skeleton woman placed the still-beating drum of the man's heart back within his chest and closed it carefully. Then she lay down beside him, and when he awoke, he found beside him a beautiful woman, whom he soon grew to know and to love, and the two of them lived together happy. And that's my story.
That's very nice.
And the story that is not exactly as it was written, but the retelling of that story was one that I found in the book Women Who Run with Wolves. I cannot remember the author's full name, and her last name is Estes, however. And that is another book, once again, that has been referred to in some of my other groups. So I hope you enjoyed.
Nestor has a story.
Oh, Nestor has a story.
Yep.
All right, Nestor, share the story, and Fox will dictate.
She actually has two stories.
Ooh.
The story that she feels is more important is that a paranormal research place she is co-founding might be on TV. She was contacted by some TV show and they want to interview them.
Oh,
Very
good.
cool.
Her other story, which was the one she told first, was about how her and her husband met.
Oh, we have to hear this.
Okay.
Can we turn the camera to face you while you tell the story?
How about you interpretive dance it?
I interpretive dance it. All right, hold on. We're going to do this. If I'm doing this properly, all right?
Okay. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
It was college, years ago. Me and some friends were at a party together. I was playing Halo 3. He came in and went, "Dude, WTF, a chick kicking butt at Halo?" The end.
Well, I do hope you soundly trounced him after he said something like that, because chicks can kick all the butt they want at Halo. And it'd be sad when they find the end and Sergeant Johnson dies. But maybe that's just me. That is a very good story.
Very good interpretive dancing.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. So does anybody else have a story to share?
Nobody else.
Nobody else? All right. Well, I guess that concludes our evening. So I hope you'll join us next week for more stories and discussions and tales and perhaps even some music. And I'll see you next week.
Did you tell them that your picture is going up on eBay?
Oh yes, this picture is going up on eBay, where you can bid on it.
eBay.
It's beautiful.
And you can find that at our eBay shop at stores.ebay.com/worldofwitches. Yay.
All right.